Meet me at the end of the world. It's my weekly talk show through We Are Here, and the money goes to Music Cares. And so, thanks for tuning in. And you can donate if you like. Today's guest is a buddy of mine, one of my favorite actors, writers, directors, musicians, Mike Imperioli. Thanks for doing this, buddy.
What's up, pal? How are you?
I'm doing all right, hanging tough somehow in New
Yeah,
York.
good, good.
What have you been up to in this madness? How you keeping busy?
I've been actually, oddly enough, very busy because I've been doing a podcast from my house and with Steve Sharippa, who was on The Sopranos with me, and he's in New York. I'm in California, and we were supposed to do it in the studio on East 11th Street. We
Okay.
were going to start recording at the end of March.
Uh-huh.
And then, in the middle of March, everything changed. I was scheduled to fly back to New York on the 26th of March and start recording. And we weren't going to do it. We were like depressed and like, who the hell needs this? The world is falling apart. And then a lot of the fans had heard about it because we put out a press release at the end of February, and they started writing in on social media saying, we're home binge watching The Sopranos, because the podcast is a Soprano rewatch, episode by episode, like deep
Right.
dive breakdown. Like, we're watching the show, we heard about the podcast. Where is it? We really want it. So the techs found a way to, through Zoom, to do it like this. We've even had guests on.
Wow.
Yesterday, we recorded an episode with the two casting people. One was in LA, one was in Connecticut. Steve is in New York. I'm in California. So the four guests on one show. So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I checked out a little bit of it before doing this, and I definitely want to talk more about that in Sopranos, but I want to kind of build to that. But I wanted to just start at the beginning. I guess me and you met. I was thinking about that. You were involved in a bar on 6th Avenue, Ciel Rouge. Was that what it's called?
Seventh
On
between
7th
20th and
Avenue,
21st.
Chelsea, yeah. And I used to come in there, I don't know, maybe when I came out of the garden after shows. I really liked it because I had a few bars in East Village, and it was always nice to go somewhere
Uh,
else. And the music was great. And I think I had my 30th birthday party there. I'm pretty sure
yes, you did. You did.
I was carried out of there. It was like one of those nights where I wanted to do a shot with every single person that came in. And some big hardcore guy carried me up 5 flights in my apartment. But I
I
remember
remember
it was
that party.
a
Yep.
good time.
Well, my wife opened that before, like the year before we met, and I met her. I met her at a bar. I was living at Chelsea in, I guess that was 95, 96, and then there was a bar next to the Chelsea that was a weird. At one point, it was Zigzag. Then it was like an S&M bar at one point. Then it
Yeah,
was
the
Lucky
S&M bar
Chang's.
restaurant place.
Right.
Yeah.
Then it was Lucky Chang's, and then it was just Chang's. It was a very strange. It went through weird, different, it morphed into weird venues. But it was next to the Chelsea, so I used to hang out there sometimes. And she was there, and we met. And then I found out she had a bar around the corner, so I started going there. And then after we got together, I would work there sometimes. Then my brother started working there, my best friend, and that was it. So I was there a lot back in the late 90s.
It was
And
kind of a thing, I think, in '99 when Sopranos came on. I didn't know you well. We'd say hello and chat, and over the years, I guess we've had some good conversations in bars and got to know each other. But I just remember thinking, wow, this guy's got this show on TV that's blowing up, and you were there, like going around, like checking on the tables, greeting
right.
people, and I was like, this dude is super humble. He's like working his wife's business, and like in this little place, it just seemed really cool, and it seemed like a place a lot of people didn't know about. At least my friends didn't, so we were kind of going somewhere else, and that always felt good. The music was good. So
Yeah, there was no sign and there was no advertising, and there was like red curtains like this behind me, like in the window, so you couldn't really see inside it. And it was only open, it was open from like 7 at night till 4 in the morning. So it was, you either had to walk by and stumble in, or you had to hear about it
right,
from someone, which was kind of the fun of it too. And
yeah.
then we'd lock the doors at whatever 4 o'clock, and on the weekend stay till 7 with friends and whoever we liked enough to let stay that late. But
Some people
that
are
kind of
doing that
thing.
now. Being a person that has a couple bars, like I get these messages like, "Oh, this bar is open and they're doing this," and I think it's just people that are starving for drugs or really young or just need the party. But I'm in the mindset I just want this thing over with, and I just don't want to be part of spreading that as much as I don't know how I would have been in my 20s, dying to get out there and whatever. I'm not so good at drinking at home, but yeah, it's this crazy time now. Like as far as people pulling down the gates, I think just as soon as we can just crush this and then get back out there. So
Yeah, well, obviously, listen. Staying at home is helping. If
yeah,
that didn't happen, it would have been. I can't even imagine the scope of this.
yeah.
I mean,
Home
so
taping is killing the music business, or whatever they said.
home what?
They used to have that commercial. Home taping is killing the music
All
business,
right.
and then they did a spoof on it. Home fucking is killing prostitution.
Right.
But back to stuff. I guess you grew up in Mount Vernon, New York, and
Yeah.
I always felt that, from going to things you've done and talking to you, that there's always been a rock and roll connection. And I used to go when I was a kid to a club up there called the Left Bank. Did you ever go to that
The
spot?
left bank. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was the Ramones played their New Year's Eve once. I don't know when, I think the early '80s.
yeah.
That was probably the biggest band that played there, but they had a lot of good punk and then like post punk and new wave bands for a stretch. Kind of an odd place for a rock club. And Mount Vernon was a weird, was not the city, but it was, you could actually take the 2 train to
That's
the
what I.
last stop, 241st, and then walk to where I lived. And or you could take the Metro North. But so it's close enough to the city, but it's not the city. It was also for many years people would go get tattoos, Big Joe's tattoo, because it was illegal in the city for many, many years, if you
Right.
remember.
Yeah.
I don't know when it became legal in the city, but for years when I was a kid, it was illegal. But there was a tattoo parlor in Mount Vernon that people used to come up. That's where people from the city would go to get tattoos.
Wow, that's cool. So you're living in Mount Vernon, and what hit you that made you want to act? I know both your parents did some acting and stuff, but like when did it dawn on you, and how did you go through that? To
My dad did acting. My mom was she was not into it. My dad did it when he was like 40. Um, community theater. He was a bus driver in the Bronx, for
Wow,
30 years, and then at some point he just wanted to do community theater, which I think is very courageous because even if you choose this as a profession, it's terrifying, know, let alone doing it and never having done it and just stepping onto a stage. But my dad especially and my mom always turned me on to really good movies when I was a kid.
yeah.
Um, the classic early '70s, mostly New York, like Dog Day Afternoon and Midnight Cowboy and um, French Connection and all that great stuff.
Well, we're close in age. I mean, that time period is just
Yeah,
beautiful and such a great time for films to see all that stuff. And
it's a great time and great actors and great filmmaking and particularly like Midnight Cowboy and Dog Day Afternoon. It was like this kind of character who was like the outsider,
yeah,
like almost like them against the world in a weird way. And there was something heroic about, and they were both like Pacino and Dustin Hoffman were both small, which I always kind of was. And I related to them, I related to that feeling like an outsider. And when I was in high school, I actually moved upstate right before I went to high school for a few years to Brewster, which is about another 40 miles from Mount Vernon. But I had a teacher there who took us to see plays in the city, which was really a big deal. They were musicals, but still, it was like being in a theater and seeing actors. It was kind of really blew my mind, and I started reading plays in my high school library, like Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller plays and David Mamet, and that really did it for me. When I started reading plays, something opened up in me. I don't even know what, but um, and then when I finished high school, instead of going to college, I started going to Lee Strasberg Institute to take part time. Like I took 2 classes a week, like 4 hours on Tuesday, 4 hours on Thursday. But I went from being in high school to being with mostly adults. And it wasn't like I was in class with like kids my age. It was a couple of kids my age, but all the way up to like people in their 40s, which I really liked. I was really happy being around people who all wanted to pursue the same thing, being around people who were, artistic and coming from different places. So that was really inspiring.
And were you going out and hanging out in clubs and seeing live music at the same time and hanging around the city, or was
Yeah,
it?
that was when I started hanging out in the city. I was really a late bloomer, when it came to like good music. Like throughout high school, I was not exposed to a lot of underground stuff
Right.
until I was 17, until I was really in the city. Um I remember a girl in my high school was wearing a Sally Can't Dance Lou Reed t-shirt, and I was like, "What's that?" She goes, "Oh, it's Lou Reed." I'm like, "Who's that?" I was like 16. I didn't know who he was. She's like,
Right.
"Lou Reed, Walking the Walls." I had no idea. I like listened to the Beatles, and I think the first LP album I ever bought was A Night at the Opera. So I was listening to like top 40 and rock and roll, Zeppelin and Stones, like that kind of stuff. But I did not know much about the punk scene or underground scene till like 1983, really.
Yeah, well, I
And
think
then
we all
everything
thought,
went crazy. Like I
yeah.
went from being very sheltered and kind of a nerdy, quiet, and then when I hit the city, totally 180. Yeah.
That was the thing when I walked into the club that your wife had and stuff. Like the music was so great, and then I went to see a play that you'd worked on at the theater you had on 29th Street, and the music was like the Dolls, and like I was like, this guy really knows his stuff, and we've talked about it a bunch. But going back to I guess those actors, those short guys like Pacino and Dustin Hoffman, and I guess even Jack Nicholson's like a little guy, and I don't know.
He's 83 today. It's his
Wow,
birthday.
yeah.
Jack Nicholson is 83.
83, man, that is amazing. Yeah, I always thought Jack Nicholson. I mean, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was one of my favorite films. I saw it in third grade. My mother took us all on my birthday, like all my little friends, like five of us, to see that film, and I got it. I used to sneak into all these theaters, and I always love these characters, like that. They're going to get away. They're going to be this hero, but they care about the people around them, and they'll go down with the ship, maybe in this self-destructive way. But I feel that the Al Pacino character, Sonny Wartzik, in Dog Day Afternoon, is similar to the character that R.P. McMurphy and Nicholson does in Cuckoo's Nest. But you had told me the story, and I want to have you tell it if you can. One night we were in Berlin, and we were talking about movies, and I said, Dog Day Afternoon. If you go on YouTube, there's an eyewitness news like 7 minutes thing, or maybe less, and it's the whole movie. Bless Sidney Lumet and making this great film, but like the whole story's in this little news clip that's on YouTube. And then you said, how Pacino got the character. You would tell me something about how he was able to find the character. Do you
Oh,
remember that?
right. Yeah, I heard an interview with Al where he at the time I think he was still drinking. He got sober very soon after Dog Day Afternoon. But he was still trying to he was going to turn down Dog Day Afternoon, you
Yeah,
know.
I heard that.
And his manager was Martin Bregman, who's also a producer, convinced him and said, "No, no, no, you have to." He wasn't sure of what the movie was, and he didn't like the idea of robbing a bank. And he was really going to turn it down, but he was convinced to do it. So he felt he hadn't quite found the character. It was the night before they were starting shooting, and he still felt he hadn't quite gotten it. And he said he drank like one of those magnums of white wine and got really loaded, and then thought of, oh, I get it. The guy forgot his glasses that day. So he's going to commit this robbery, something very important to him and very obviously very risky and very dangerous. And one of the most things he had to remember was to bring his glasses, and that day he forgot them. And somehow that little thing was his way in,
Yeah.
rather than just, I mean, obviously he understands the character. The guy wants to get married, and he is to this man who he wants to have a sex change, and got to get the money. But he needed that way in. And if you watch the movie, you could see like he's blinking a lot, he's squinting, kind of like
Yeah.
I am right now, but he's blinking a lot, and
He's like
it's
wired, trying to like, yeah, get his eyes open like that.
yeah, so he's not seeing things clearly because he didn't bring his glasses. So it's an interesting metaphor, but for an actor it makes a lot of sense because those little physical things sometimes really ground you, and give you
You feel
a
that way,
place to
like
put.
with wardrobe and stuff. Like I remember hearing some story on Raging Bull when De Niro said when he got a certain jacket, like he put it on and he like it gave him the character. Do you have things like that?
Yeah, yeah, a lot of stuff like that. Music is a big one for me. That can kind of really get me to certain places, and sometimes it's just figuring out how you relate to the other characters. Like I've done stuff like bought stuff for the people I was acting with, like gifts, but like gifts that the character would buy, like somehow that make connections that way, and whatever works. In some ways you never know what's going to work, but some place to put your attention, to focus your attention on something other than just the lines and the action.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad Pacino took that role in Dog Day Afternoon, and it was funny
Jesus.
seeing it. You come from Mount Vernon, I come from Whitestone, Queens, and in the '70s, as much as it was a cool time, people were very homophobic and ignorant and racist, as all that. And I remember going to see it after Pacino had done The Godfather, and he was Al Pacino, and it was my community was a lot of Italian macho people, a lot of Irish working class, and seeing it in the theater, packed theater, and you're watching the film and the way Pacino plays it, once the crowd finds out that he's robbing the bank to get a sex change for his male lover, and every macho homophobic motherfucker in the theater and in Queens still was rooting for him to the end of the movie for that, it kind of put people into a human place. And I think even like The
Yeah.
Sopranos with Tony Soprano with James Gandolfini's character, like shrinks were like this taboo thing, like you were weak or crazy, and then suddenly this guy is like doing this thing that's so powerful and runs all these people and he's macho and he goes to a therapist. So I think when things like that make people look at stuff differently, it's great. And
It is. I mean, that movie is way ahead of its time in a lot of ways, and very ballsy choice for Al to do because at the time he was like the biggest movie star in the world, just about.
yeah,
After The Godfather, he was in that Godfather's biggest box office hit ever when it came out, and very risky choice in 1973 or four, whenever that was, and I did hear also that there was a scene in the original script where they kissed, Chris Sarandon and Al Pacino, and I don't know if it was a director or Al said that's gonna really be hard for people to, like you just said, all these macho guys being able to cheer him on. That might have been at
yeah.
that point in time too much for them to take.
Well,
And then he goes and does Cruising in,
yeah,
what
he
was that,
takes it even way
1980,
further.
which
1980,
is way further. I mean,
yeah.
and you talk about really risky choices for a major movie star at that time. I mean, lots of guts on his part.
Yeah. Oh, that's totally wild. That's funny because if you think about like when I was going to school every day at junior high school, or maybe actually it was in grade school, and the Stones were on for some girls on SNL, and I was so excited. It was the first Stones record I'd bought with my own money, and they're playing one of the songs I forget, and Mick Jagger and Ron Wood tongue kissed during the song, and I went back to school, on Monday after Saturday Night Live, and every kid, you faggot, but it was like that was the work. I was so upset about that. It was so great. But to go back to you and the early days, so you studied in the city, and then I guess the first film you did is Lean on Me. Is that the first?
That was the first role I got in a film, and it was one line,
Right.
which got cut from the movie because I was just so terrible. I had been studying, right, for like 6 years by then, maybe 5 years, trying to get parts through Backstage. Was a newspaper. You'd answer ads. They'd have like play off Broadway plays and NYU films, and sometimes they'd have a big movie. And I auditioned. I get this one line. The director was John Alvidson, who did Rocky.
Right.
And he just didn't have, he was just not a patient guy. He was a little overwhelmed with like 500 kids in a auditorium. And I was just so nervous. I mumbled the line. I had never been in front of a camera. I didn't know what to do or where to look, or I was so nervous. I was horrible. So the line was, "Hey, I'm going to be a star." That was the line.
Oh yeah.
The line is not in the movie, but you do see me. This is about this principal played by Morgan Freeman who cleans up this bad school, rough school, and he gets rid of all the bad kids, expels them all. And I'm one of the bad kids that they expel. But that was the first thing. I got my SAG card, which was kind of a big thing for me at the time, or I thought it was. It really wasn't. It didn't really mean you were going to work any more than you had anyway, but it was some mark of being a professional or whatever. And then I did 2 other little indie movies that nobody saw. And then the 4th thing was Goodfellas, the 4th film that I got.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about that. How did that come about? Then how did who was the casting person and how did that part come?
By then I had an agent, a girl who was in my acting class, because I stayed in class. I went to a different teacher a couple of years in, but I stayed in class just because I was around a lot of really good actors who we were doing stuff outside class, like starting to produce plays off Broadway. But one girl, we were doing a scene together in class, and she got an audition for an agent, and the agent took both of us on. So I started getting auditions. The casting director was Ellen Lewis.
Right.
And I met her, and she said, "Oh, that's, what they did was, the book was out about, which was called Wise Guy. Nick Pileggi wrote it with Henry Hill, I guess. And they didn't give you the script for Goodfellas, but they gave you one of Joe Pesci's scenes. Like all the guys were reading Joe Pesci's character. And in the book, Joe Pesci's character is for the early part of the movie, he's like 22. So I thought I was auditioning for that because I was reading his lines in another scene or something. So she had me back to meet Scorsese, and I knew from doing research that he liked improv. So I just did a lot of improvisation, and he, gave me the part. But I didn't really know I was auditioning for any other part. But what was the name of Pesci's character? Tommy DeVito or something like that.
Yeah. And then that thing is coming, and you're working. Were you intimidated working around these guys? You felt comfortable? Did it seem like holy shit? That's De Niro and Scorsese, or you felt?
Well, yeah, it was definitely holy shit. I mean, it was like being in like the minors and going into Yankee Stadium in the World Series or something. For me, for being like a Italian kid from New York, who wants to be an actor, those guys were giants. I mean, especially De Niro and Scorsese. I mean, it didn't get really. I mean, the only other bigger thing for me would have been Al Pacino, but so. But oddly enough, I didn't feel as nervous as I thought I would, and particularly Scorsese just made me feel like I belonged there. Totally opposite than what John Avildsen did. Marty really. Yeah, you worked with him. You worked on Bringing Out the Dead, right?
Bringing Out the Dead. Ellen Lewis had got me. I have one part. I had one line, like like your other film, "I'm going to be a star," or whatever. It was. I read for another part in the Waldorf Astoria, and there's Martin Scorsese. It was like a trip. I was happy just to go read for him in the Waldorf in a little room, and I read for something else, and then they said, "Well, the part was cut out, but if it comes back up, another part, you'll have something." Marty has a memory of an elephant. And I was like, "Oh, that's fine." I read for him. I could tell my grandkids or whatever. But then they called me back, and I didn't read. I just came in. But it was at CBGB's for 2 days. I was the club doorman. But me and Scorsese, or however you say his name, we just talked, movies. And then we talked music. Like he just wanted to talk about, Jane's Addiction came on one day, and he's turned to me and goes, "That's Jane's Addiction. They're one of the good ones, right?" Like he just knew his stuff. And yeah, I had this one part, and but it was a great experience to spend the 2 days with him, and he made me really feel comfortable because Nicolas Cage made me uncomfortable, and Ving Rhames was in the scene. He was really nice, and Harper Simon. But Bringing Out the Dead kind of reminded me of like After Hours meets Taxi Driver, but different. But it had a great soundtrack. There's Johnny Thunders and Clash all over that film.
Right.
So,
And Bad
but
Brains, right?
Bad Brains is in After Hours, actually.
After Hours, right?
Yeah, he
After
put it in the
Hours.
punk scene, put Pay to Come. But yeah, so you're working. I think I remember this from another podcast you did with a fellow musician buddy of mine, Joseph Arthur, and you talked about the scene in Goodfellas. I think on his podcast, he's a great podcast about just how De Niro, watching him, how he would save his energy between scenes,
Yeah,
every take, how he would act, and then something crazy. I think you told me happened during the shooting of your scene, right? Didn't was it like did you get hurt? Was it an injury?
I
Uh,
did. Yeah, so we shot one scene, the first scene the first day, and the second scene the second day, and pretty much spent. I mean, pretty much spent the whole day on the scenes, which is not really how movies are usually made. Like I kind of thought that's how movies were made. I mean, because we spent the whole morning rehearsing and improvising, and like we had all the time in the world. And most movies are not like that. They're just like they try to shoot 3 scenes in a day, and it's hardly any rehearsal, and everything go go go. And Scorsese's set was so chill and relaxed, and like there was no rushing vibe at all. Which
yeah.
now I didn't know that was unique back then. But it is. But yeah, I shot this scene when my character gets killed, and I'm walking over towards the table with a glass in my hand, and I did my own stunt, which I wanted to do, which I thought that would be cool. I said, no, I can do it. Just they patted up my back. I was going to go flying back into the bar and fall down. Which in hindsight, after being an actor for many years, is not as easy as I thought it was. But when I hit the ground, the glass in my hand shattered because whoever was doing props didn't give me breakaway glass, whatever, fake candy glass. And I sliced open 2 of my fingers pretty badly. So one of the PAs rushed me we were shooting in Maspeth, Queens, rushed me to the hospital. And I walk into the emergency room, and all the admitting people are looking at me horrified. And I said, I cut my hand. I need to get stitches. I think I'm holding like a gauze or a napkin or some shit, but I have 3 huge bullet holes and blood everywhere in my chest, and they just flip out. They don't listen to anything I'm saying. They think I'm delirious. They put me on a gurney and wheel me into some kind of triage room, and they're like, calm down. I said, no, I'm in a movie. Like, yeah, sure, you're in a movie, whatever. Relax, shut up. And I'm like, no, I'm working with Robert. Finally, they started going into my shirt and cutting it open. They saw the squibbing. I said, I told you, it's a movie. And then they made me wait for like 4 hours till they got to me to stitch me up. Went back and shot a couple of more takes.
Really?
But I think they used that first take in the final cut.
At first, wow. Well, I think that so many people probably it's the first time they saw you. It's such a memorable scene. And then, of course, how that movie, I think in so many of one of the greatest films of all time. And it's one of those things, I think, when it comes on TV, like The Godfather and probably Jaws for me and certain things, that no matter where I am or whatever's going on, it comes on TV and I just can't stop watching this. I've had this conversation with, lots of people.
No, I know.
Is that a thing for you? If Goodfellas comes on, do you go, wow, let me check this out? Or is it
yeah, and even more so now, like with when that movie first started playing on TV, it was still like close to the time when it was made. But now when you look at it, it looks like an old movie. Even like it was shot on film, and
it looks like a
texture of it.
Yeah. It feels like the 70s, and what is it, 89 or 90, right? It's like 90.
Shot in 89, released in 90, yeah. But it's just a great movie. I mean, I had no idea what it was going to be like. I mean, even shooting those scenes, you don't know, are they going to are going to be in the movie? What are they going to look like when they're cut? I had no idea what was going to happen, but I remember seeing it. And it was pretty crazy, the first time I saw it, I thought it was amazing, the movie.
Yeah. Oh, it still is. Just watch it over and over, every second of it. And then I want to talk to you about a film, I guess, Addiction, because Abel Ferrara is a pretty interesting director. I'm a fan. What was that like working with him?
Well, my at the time I was living with the actress who was the lead, Lily Taylor. We were a couple, so I was on the and I was a big Abel fan, so I was on the set every day, and I became pretty close with Abel and spent a lot of time with him. And after that too, um, it was very interesting watching him work because he's like all soul. I mean, he understands filmmaking from a technical point of view, but everything comes from the gut and it's about feel and emotion. And like, I remember him, they were shooting on Third Street near like Cafe Reggio, but on Third Street between
Yeah.
like McDougal and Sullivan. He set up this long tracking shot. And I think the lead character was walking across the sidewalk or something. It was a very interesting shot. They had a great DP named Ken Kelch, who's done a lot of Abel's movies, a lot of other movies too. He's phenomenal. But they took a really long time to set up this shot, design the shot, and put it on the track, and rehearse it, and light it, and stuff like that. And I mean, I'm sitting with him behind the monitor, and the first final run through, and all the elements are in place and ready to go. He goes, no, 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 it's all wrong. We got to do it over, take it apart. I mean, 3, 4. I mean, this is indie movie. I think they shot the whole movie in like 18 days, all nights. Um, and just like to me, it looked great. I mean, probably to most people, but there was something emotional that wasn't working for him. It wasn't hitting him, and he kind of readjusted the whole thing. But he's done some. I mean, Dangerous Game, I think, is a very underrated movie because that's really very autobiographical. Like Harvey Keitel's basically playing Abel in a sense. And Bad Lieutenant's phenomenal. I really like. He made that movie about Mary. The one about the actress playing Mary. I think it's
Oh, I
called
think I've seen it.
Mary.
I forget what it's called. I saw it in Angelica's. I'm trying to remember what
But
that.
he lives in Rome now. He moved there a few years ago. He got sober. He became a Buddhist and meditator, and got remarried and has a young daughter, and makes all his movies in Europe now. Even they don't. His movies don't even get theatrical release in the U.S. anymore. It's really strange, but he does in Europe a lot. And he's made like in the last couple of years 4 or 5 movies.
Wow, I got to check it out. It's like Woody. They don't release his Woody Allen in America. And then I want to talk about Spike and Malcolm X and all that, but Basketball Diaries, you had a part in there. I remember it really well, and I really, for someone that read that book, I really enjoyed the film, the Basketball Diaries film. And how did that come into your life?
That yeah, that was they were talking about that movie for a while. Like before Leonardo DiCaprio was attached, I think there were a couple of different attempts at making that.
I was once in a bar talking to Jim Carroll, and I asked him something about the book, and then the movie was out, and he said that Cassavetes was originally going to make that film, and I was like, wow, that would have been really different. But have you ever
Wow.
heard that? No, he
I
said
never heard that,
yeah,
but
he said that to me. Maybe that was true, or maybe that was a wish of his. I don't know. I didn't know him that well.
yeah, that had been around as an idea for a movie for a while, and yeah, it was a good experience. I liked working on it. The working with DiCaprio was great. We had a really good time. It was remember we shot. He I play his best friend who's dying of cancer in the hospital, Bobby, who's
Yeah.
mentioned in the song, and all the people who died, about having cancer. And he sneaks me out of the hospital and brings me to a peep show. But I remember going down Times Square, and it was during that time, met right during the transition of Times Square, and they had those Jenny Holzer messages on the marquees on in Times Square on all the theaters. Like they had art installations in some of the
On the
you
porno
know
theaters and all that stuff.
yeah, it was like during that weird transition period, but they tried to make it look like it was still like the 70s and still gritty and nasty. But that was a lot of fun. I had a really good cast, that movie.
Yeah, I thought Mark
Yeah,
Wahlberg was great in that film
yeah,
too.
I think that might have been his first movie.
Yeah, that was great. And then you worked with Spike Lee on Malcolm X, which is another amazing film. And then you wrote Summer of Sam, right? You wrote most of the whole screenplay on
I
Summer.
co-wrote it with Victor Colicchio, who was it was actually his idea. The first drafts of it were before I came involved. I read it. I was a friend of his, and um, what happens in the script and in the movie actually happened to one of my mother's cousins, who was suspected of being the killer by people that he knew, and was, beaten almost to death up in Mount Vernon. So when I read the script, I was like, because that happened in a couple of places in the city where like people suspected somebody of being the killer. The cops are
Right.
going on TV and saying, look out for the weird guy in your neighborhood. He lives alone. He might live in a basement or and people were getting kind
Well,
of
you weren't too
nuts.
far. David Berkowitz is from Yonkers. That's up there, the top of the Bronx, and
He lived in Yonkers and he worked in New Rochelle in the post
yeah,
office. So he was right up in
just
that.
probably in the basement or something like. But the
Yeah.
film, was that the first like writing you had done as far as the screenplay or worked on, or was there stuff before that?
I'd been writing for 10 years before that, but I had like, from 20 to 30, I moved probably 12 times and lived in 12 different apartments. And I'd always carry all this notebooks and shit. By the time I was 30, I had a stack
Right.
and it was all shit. And one day I threw everything away as I said to myself, you just want to be right. You don't have anything to say, and I threw everything away and it kind of was liberating, and then that was right around I started working on Summer of Sam, and I figured, okay, we could say something through this, and originally I wanted to direct it, and I brought it to Spike Lee, and he was going to executive produce it, and we couldn't get a deal. We couldn't get a studio, to get on me as a director because I hadn't done anything like that. I wasn't really that known as an actor even. So we went through a couple of different directors, and Spike said, I really want to do this. And that was great because he was really close to the material, and he Spikes, and we got a deal. And I was going to do the Adrian Brody part.
Right.
And then by the time we got, I think it was Disney or Buena Vista was a studio. By the time they greenlit it, right that summer, we were shooting the first season of The Sopranos, so I couldn't do the movie. I only did a small part.
The theater, right? You were in the porno theater.
I played a projectionist in a porno theater.
Yeah.
When I did the pilot of The Sopranos the year before, right? So I get offered this pilot, and I got offered I auditioned for Woody Allen, right? I always wanted to work with Woody Allen back, he was one of my favorites. So they offered me a little part in a movie called Celebrity that Leonardo DiCaprio was the star of.
The Sam Rockwell part.
Sam Rockwell did my part. That's what happened because they couldn't work out one day. So the Sopranos was in they call first position. So you could do another job if the second job's willing to work. The first job's willing to work with the people. So they had everything worked out for both shoots except for one day. Neither production would budge. So my agent said, you got to make a choice. You want to do this pilot or do you want to work with Woody Allen? And I think it was because it wasn't much of a part in the Woody movie.
He's like a rock star guy that's looking to buy some artwork or something, and he goes to some.
I think I don't never saw the movie, so he was a rock star or an actor, and he's got an entourage, and I was part of his entourage. But the Soprano pilot, the part was so good, I was like, well, this is a much better role. But if the role in the Woody Allen movie was good, I probably would have done it. I don't know. But Sam Rockwell wound up doing the part that I couldn't do.
The reason I know is I had this apartment and I'd always been in bands, and Sam Rockwell wanted to spend some time in my apartment, like where I lived in East 3rd Street, East Village, and kind of see like a rock and roll guy's apartment, and stayed there a couple nights. I was like, yeah, I'm on tour, like, get whatever vibe you're going to get. But I like Celebrity, but I think you made the right choice. So I think that,
that would have been a disaster. That would have been the worst choice in history.
Yeah, thank you for making the right choice. But the Spike film, is probably it might be the first one that he didn't write. I always think of him writing and directing everything.
He took, he has a writing credit on it. So he, before he shot the movie, he did a pass. He added a couple of things that weren't in there, like the Jimmy Breslin prologue, some of the news stuff he rewrote. He added the stuff with the talking dog, which wasn't in the script, the original script. But yeah, it was also the first movie he did that wasn't really focused on African Americans.
Sure. Yeah, and I think in some ways, I like the film a lot, but I think he might have fell short a little on the scene at CBGB's with the styles of how people look. They're supposed to be in the 70s, and he had them more looking like they were in Rancid in the 90s or something. But
yeah, there were a lot of piercings, which weren't really
yeah,
that big in the
mohawks and things like that.
70s.
But as
Mohawks
far
came
as
a little late.
yeah,
That was probably more production design or something like that.
yeah. But if it was a film of African Americans, he would have had it down so perfectly where every little, it's just a different wheelhouse maybe. But the film really captured that feeling that I went through growing up, getting into punk or rock music and being the freak of the neighborhood and having people want to beat the hell out of you and not, being alone and just the music speaking to you. And it really had that. And also, I mean, for those who don't know, the movie is about this, serial killer son of Sam during this one summer in 1977 that, killed all these people. And he was going after blonde, women and they were shooting couples in cars. But it was such a scary time growing up. I mean, we were reading it in the paper, and then this guy starts writing letters, to Jimmy Breslin, the writer at the Post or the Daily News. And the city, it was like just the way now the world feels with this going on with the pandemic and the lockdown, and New York is so different, the whole world is. It felt really crazy. But then on another hand, it's such a love letter. When I saw the film, I saw it on the 4th of July. I actually went with Joey Ramone, went to see it on, I think, 12th and 2nd at that theater. And at the end, when Reggie Jackson wins and Jimmy Breslin's talking, and I just cried because not only being a story about this murderer, it just felt like it was a love letter to New York and a certain New York that I was part of as a kid and doesn't maybe exist anymore. And I just bawled at the ending, and probably for a whole different reason of what the movie was exactly about. But it's great. And
Yeah. I mean, I feel the same way about it. Because if you did live in New York during that time, that summer particularly, there was the blackout.
Right.
Now, it was really hot that summer. The Yankees were like on fire. Elvis died that summer. It was just like and this killer's like on the loose, and people, were afraid to go out because he was killing people outside of nightclubs in like Lover's Lane, people making out and stuff like that. And that people weren't going out to clubs like in the Bronx and Queens and stuff. Like nightlife was dying because people were afraid to go out. So it was very, and also oddly enough, those times like now in a way also unites people because you're all experiencing this very, very different way of life together and very extreme, tense kind of moment, but you're all experiencing at the same time. Like what happened after 9/11, like everybody was, feeling all that loss and all that, grief together. So
yeah, there's definitely a unity. Well, I'm going to get to the next one, The Sopranos. I know we touched on it a little bit. I feel like it's really great to talk to you about it now because so many people I know are binge watching it right now, and a lot of people are telling me that their wife or their friend or their boyfriend or people hadn't seen it, and it's such a great time. And for me, I consider it, maybe one of the, if not the best TV show of all time, but one of the best up there with The Honeymooners, and I think it changed the whole thing. It flipped it. Went from where you'd go to the movies for the quality stuff in the theater, and you stay at home and watched a TV movie.
yeah.
And with David Chase and all of you guys in the cast and everything, it just became where now you have all these series and we watch all these great series at home. It just kind of, to me, seemed to change that so much. And I remember those first few years, like every Sunday. I mean, it was just so religious, and you couldn't get it in bars to put it on just casual cable. You had to order it, and it was just mind blowing. So I just want to know how that role came about, how getting the part, like what's the beginnings of that for you?
I do agree that about The Honeymooners is my favorite TV show. I think The Sopranos
I'm
might be
thinking
my.
Sopranos and Honeymooners equal.
The Sopranos is my second favorite, but The Honeymooners, I was watching it the other day. I mean, it's like I've watched The Honeymooners so many times. I mean, there's 39 of the main ones,
Proper
right?
episodes, yeah.
I've seen them since I'm as long as I can remember, right? Over and over and over again. And I can still laugh at moments and still love it. I don't know how is that possible?
Yeah.
It's just incredible. I mean, you know, there's something very special about what they did, and I don't know what it is. I mean, there's no set practically. It's what's going to happen. What? Well, I was just watching a documentary about it, and what's interesting is Jackie always gives everyone else the punchline. If you think about Norton, especially Norton and Trixie, always have you can't put your arm around a memory. I can't even put my arms around you. He always gives everyone else the punchline. He just reacts and is the the butt of the joke, which
Right.
is, if you think about it, for the star, because he was most certainly the star. It was his show. You think the star would get the punchline? He
Yeah.
always gives everyone else the punchline. It's interesting,
Really
but
smart,
yeah.
generous. Yeah. And they did
So
that live. They did that in front of a
they
live
did that
audience,
live.
and they left mistakes in. And he's probably drinking. He's probably definitely drinking, right? He's definitely has a few go in
He
him.
probably did. I also learned, and I didn't know this, like Audrey Meadows
Yeah.
played Alice, right? She was the one who really kept everything together. Like, she knew everybody else's lines and everybody else's blocking, and Jackie didn't like to rehearse very much. And when he would get lost, like Alice would, like, she'd put her hand on her hip and point where Jackie was supposed to go, like where the blocking was, or like had
Wow.
little cues to get him back on track when he would lose it. Like that, I found interesting too.
Did you go back
Um,
and see? Can you see those little things now?
yeah. They show. It's very interesting to watch.
I remember like
But
waking up in the middle of the night being sick with the flu, and my mother had it on, and it just scared the hell out of me because it was bleak and he's yelling and these people were broke. I was too young. It just frightened the hell out of me. But I love the Christmas one when he comes out and he says, "We don't usually break character, but tonight the Cramdens and the Nortons would like to wish you all a Merry Christmas." And yeah, it's wonderful. It's really great. We didn't know the show when we saw Smokey and the Bandit, me and my cousin and stuff. We were like, "It's that old guy in Smokey and the Bandit." We didn't realize that was the great one, Jackie Gleason.
yeah,
But yeah, when
incredible.
Sopranos first came on, it just, I think the first episode, I was a little like, all right, here we go. Here's, the Godfather, Goodfellas, like the mafia thing done. And I was a little like, I don't know how I'm going to feel about this, and the name, and it, I saw the signs on the buses. And the first episode took me a second. And by the second episode, and that was it. It was like an addiction, a religion. And I actually probably should go back and go through it. So getting that part as Christopher, how'd that come about?
I had the same experience that you did, because it came about really through the casting people, Sheila Jaffe and Georgianne Walken, who's actually Christopher's wife. But I had done a few indie movies with them. I did Trees Lounge, Steve Buscemi's first movie that he directed. That's why David Chase used them for casting, because he loved the casting in Trees Lounge. He loved the cast. So they would always bring me in on anything I was remotely right for. But we just had the two of them on as guests on the podcast that I do at Steve Sharippa. And they said when they read the script, they wanted me to get that role. Like, they read it and thought of me. And they also thought of Jim Gandolfini, and they wanted him to have that role. So they, were in our corners. But when I read the script, the name threw me a little bit. The tone of the pilot, it's very hard to really see how wide that of scope that story would be eventually. I wasn't sure. There was a movie that was on cable called The Don's Analyst, which was kind of like Analyze This, but like a shitty version of it, which was a bad comedy about a mobster in therapy. And I think Analyze This might have been casting. I think I might have read that script and auditioned or something. I was like, oh, this is like another mob guy in therapy. Is this a spoof? Because there were scenes that were very slapsticky funny.
Yeah.
And there were scenes that were pretty dark, but I liked the character, and I liked who they were casting because I knew Edie Falco from some other work. From we had worked together before, and I knew John Ventimiglia from acting school, and I knew Sirico and Vinny Pastore, and I knew a lot of them. I didn't know Jim, so I was like, all right, this is gonna. I didn't know who David Chase was. There was no real series on HBO then on cable, so I'm like, it's a good cast. It'll be fun. And then it got greenlit. So a year later, we went back and shot the rest of season one. And that's exactly what happened to me. Script after script, it kept getting better, more interesting, more complex, and unique. And I was like, wow, this is friggin' amazing. By the time we finished that first season, I was like, this is incredible. Whether or not anyone's going to see it was another story because they're, the idea of having a dramatic series on cable television, I thought, all right, probably nobody's going to really see this. Is it going to? I think Our List might have been on, but on HBO, which was not a big show. And then it went on the air in January '99, and the reviews really made that show because the reviews were crazy, over the top, positive, to the point where Saturday Night Live did a spoof about the reviews of The Sopranos.
I got to find that. And was there like a period, like how many episodes in or how many weeks in, where suddenly you guys realized that? Was there a point where you're like, "Holy shit, this is blowing up! Like, this is going to be big"? How quick did that happen? How many weeks in, and when was that? Do you remember?
It went on the air in January '99. We weren't shooting then. I think we went back to shoot season 2 in the summer.
Right.
But it was pretty quick. It was really, because the reviews just snowballed.
Got everybody.
Then they put up a billboard in Times Square. That was a big deal. See your face on a billboard in Times Square was like a big. I was like, okay, something's going on here. But it just kind of got bigger from there, really.
Well, maybe my first skepticism might have changed so much where not only the violence and the tough stuff and the, all the stuff that goes on with crime and the mafia and all that, but the family stuff. I mean, all the male characters itself, everybody's so great, but the women and the relationships, male-female relationships, were so strong. And the family stuff, it was like everything was strong, like the stuff that you expected, the violence and the tough stuff, but the other stuff was just so nice. And I was thinking, like, with Christopher, how much of yourself, like, were you able to take liberties with the dialogue, or is it pretty strict to the script in that? How much do you put into Christopher when you?
No liberties. No, there was no ad-libbing on The Sopranos, okay. Which is the opposite of Martin Scorsese. It's tons of ad-libbing, Martin Scorsese movies. Or it's at least Goodfellas, the one I worked on. And from what I've heard, others. I really based him on somebody that I knew, who was not a mafia guy, but at one point was involved with some guys and was doing some shit with some guys in New York, and had some at one point wanted to maybe act, but never really did. He doesn't know. I will never tell him or never reveal who that was, but there was something in his personality. He could be so emotional, this guy. You almost didn't believe it was real in a weird way. Like I remember just watching him behave, and like the way he reacted to things was so like big and very different than the way I am as a person, that it always struck me as very weird. And I thought, man, if I could make this work with this character, that would be something interesting. And that's what I kind of based the character on. I mean, after like a few episodes, I never thought about it again, because it takes on its own momentum and its own life. But I definitely had that in mind when I started.
And the character builds. I mean, you start as this person as we get to know everybody, but then when addiction kicks in, and it's a real growing, and a lot of stuff comes out. And you won an Emmy for it, which is great for that role.
Yeah.
I got a feeling that there was like a real friendship between everybody watching it every year, every week, that there was some kind of magic I felt maybe going on off screen. And I remember after you guys stopped for 2 years, I was so hungry for it, me and my friends, and I stopped into a bar on Spring Street near Don Hill's nightclub called the Ear Inn, which hopefully will still be there after all this. One of the oldest bars in New York. And I think you were there. We knew each other a little bit, and a couple other guys that you mentioned, Steve. And I don't know, James Gandolfini had come to some of our other spots, Niagara and places. We'd seen him around Manitoba's, and he hung out. We could
Monagot. He used to call Manitoba's Monagots.
Yeah. And he had this thing that I felt from Robert De Niro when I met him, that an actor can put out energy. And I've seen it with Hell's Angels and other really strong personalities, where Gandolfini was in Niagara and he was leaning up against the wall, and he was, whatever he was doing, drinking or whatever, talking to somebody, he had an energy around him that was like, do not come up and talk to me. Like, just felt the presence. And I'd seen him be nice or whatever, but it was just the intensity. And so, but then I saw you guys all hanging out in what's the gentleman, I've met him with you, played Artie Bucco.
Johnny Ventimiglia, Johnny V.
Yeah, great guy and great actor. And you guys were all hanging out, and this was in a period where the show was off for 2 years, and so I was happy just to go into this bar, have a beer, and like see you guys in the corner, like smiling and whatever. And
I remember that. I remember that day. I really do.
And I was like, wow, these guys hang out, and I need this show. And the rumor that came back, this is less internet or whatever, was that you guys had cut a certain contract with HBO for a certain amount of money, and then the show had gotten bigger, and I think they were going to, this is all hearsay, raise a rumor or whatever, raise James Gandolfini's money, but he said that, I'm not going to do this unless everybody gets a raise, and we're not going to come back until the money's up or whatever. I don't know if that's a true story.
That happened, but it wasn't why it was so long. There was a year and a half. I think it was a year and a half between seasons. David just wanted that much time to really just recalibrate and have some mental space to break new stories and not feel pressured. He didn't want it to be like, because he came from network television, 22 episodes, 9 months of shooting, 3 months off, writer's room goes back, after, a month break or something. He didn't want that experience. He wanted lots of space, lots of room to develop the stories. That's why there was so much time in between. There was a contract dispute. What Jim actually did was he got a deal, a merchandising deal. So he got some money that I guess a lot of the other actors didn't get. And he brought 13 of us one day into his trailer and gave us all checks for $33,333.
Wow.
That was $500,000 that he divvied up out of his merchandising.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, that's
he
true.
was a really real sweet guy, and I imagine.
He's a good dude.
Yeah, and you did some writing on the show. How did that come about for writing?
That was basically because I fell in love with the show, shooting the first season, the first 13 episodes. I just loved every aspect of it, and so I wrote a spec script in between season 1 and season 2. Summer of Sam came out, and I invited David to the premiere. So between those two things, he liked what I was doing and agreed to have me write.
The ending is it's one of those things like the JFK assassination. Everybody has a different, story on it. And do you feel that if James had lived and that there was talk, or do you even have a sense if there would have been more, if you guys would have I had rumors of a feature film, and, is that something that's within David's head to see what would have happened?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not really sure. Probably could have been. If he didn't kill him off, I'm sure there could have been something, but I never really heard anything concrete. They shot a prequel movie about the Sopranos. It mostly focuses on Christopher's father. That's going to be released. It was supposed to be released in September. They shot it already. It's not going to come out till March now. It's delayed.
Newark, is it? Something like that?
The Many Saints of Newark. Many Saints is Moltisanti in Italian, in English.
Yeah. Well, I also really loved Escape from Dannemora, where you play Andrew Cuomo, which has become our hero in this country. It's really amazing.
He certainly has. Yeah, I got to spend some time with him right before I shot that movie, and he invited me to he had a birthday party at Cipriani downtown. It was a fundraiser for his re-election campaign, and he had me introduce Bill Clinton at the event. And I spent time in his office just talking about the prison break and why it was important, what he did and why it was important what he did. But I walked away saying, this guy should run for president. I mean, after I met him, I was like, he just seemed very not about politics as much as about just getting things done. Like I mean, I'm sure he does have it. He is a member of the Democratic Party or whatever. But I felt like his attitude was about what's needed and sensible and pragmatic rather than just like party line kind of stuff and furthering the party and answering to the party line. He's gotten a lot done in the state. I have a lot of admiration for him, and he's able to work with both sides of the aisle. He's not polarizing where it's always this roadblock and stalemate. And I think he's gotten a lot of great stuff done in the state. I mean, before all this, and especially the leadership he's shown during this.
Yeah, people are really needing it, and they're feeling safer and more confident watching him speak every day. People that aren't even in this state. So you saw that early on. I know from hanging out many nights, how much you love music, and you've played around. You had a band, Dolce Vita. Is that the name of the group?
Yeah.
And do you still do music? You still play, write songs?
Gigs? Not so much lately, but since I've been back in New York, because I didn't have a place in New York for a number of years. And then the last 2 years I've been, I have a place in New York again and spending more time there than here in the last year and a half. But so I've reconnected with the musicians that I played with. I mean, I really liked the two guys that I played with. It wasn't so much about, it was much more about our dynamic together that really made it work for me, and writing together and just how we related to each other. That was the kick for me, so I think until I can do that, and be with them, and practicing again and writing with them, it's not something I do so much on my own. My youngest son is a musician, and it's been fun watching him kind of grow as a guitar player. I mean, he's much more of a guitar player than I am. I'm more of a rhythm guitar player, but he can play. He's a lead guitarist, but he's really fun to. It's fun to watch him discover music and love it.
Yeah, I saw a little clip. He's like unbelievable. He's got this nasty speed blues, and he's got the tone. Really got on that Strat. It's cool.
Yeah, he's very obsessed and knows everything about guitars, and not really through, I mean, a lot of it was through his own initiative, learning. You know what I mean? He just, took it on himself to learn how to do it.
And I saw a film that came out in 2009, but you had a screening of it at the Metrograph downtown, The Hungry Ghost, and it knocked me out. It was so great. A really, really cool film that you had directed, and some of the guys from Sopranos were in it. And it's just, and you mentioned that day when you spoke before the film, how Cassavetes was a big influence on that and a big impact on you as a director and stuff. And I think anybody watching this, the Sopranos fan, and whatever, any that likes good movies, I think that's one I really recommend, especially during these times of lockdown. The Hungry Ghost, it's so great. So.
Yeah, that was a indie movie. The interesting thing about that is all the parts were written for the people who played them, except for the teenage boy who we had to cast, because I didn't know anybody that age who was an actor. So, but every role was written for the person. Almost I'd say 90% for the people who played it, and that's really special if you could do that, because that's not the usual case, when you do movies.
Yeah, no, it had a heaviness and then a really cool spirituality, and it's just like that balance of stuff was real harsh, but then there was something else. There was a thread of love in there, which I always found in the Cassavetes films like that. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was at the radio station WFMU doing a radio thing, and I saw the poster for it, and he's the late night DJ, the father in it, and it was like, oh, there it is. But it's a cool one. And then we got limited time because I think Matt Pinfield's coming up next. But I got one more thing I want to talk to you about. Matt Pinfield's going to have one of the guys from the Verve pipe on after this. Stick around. But and I'm on next week. Meet me at the end of the world. Again, I'm doing these conversations. The donations go to Music Cares. This is something that Linda Perry and a bunch of folks put together and asked me to do this. I I don't usually play Charlie Rose or Dick Cavett or Letterman, but I've had all these folks on that are my friends and people that I'm fans of, so it makes it kind of easy. Thanks for doing this. This book came out, The Perfume Burned His Eyes, and one night you said to me, I'm working on a book, and man, writing a book is really hard. And you're like, and you told me the title, and I said, that sounds familiar. And then you told me, it was from a Lou Reed song on New York on that album. And and you told me the story of it, just as the basic story. And I was really excited. I remember I went out to a great bookstore and picked up a few copies on Sunset Boulevard, Book Soup, which is one of my favorite bookstores.
Yeah,
and I got
me too.
a bunch, and I flew back to New York, and I gave them out, and it was just so great. And this is a story of a young boy coming from Queens, which I can relate to, living in the city with his single mom, and finds out that Lou Reed, with his lover, is living in the same building on the Upper East Side during this period in the 70s. So it's a fictional novel, but in some ways it's based on some stuff that makes sense as a Lou Reed fan. And so I just want to know how that came about, and how, if you ever got around Lou Reed, and where it all came together, because it's a really cool book.
That I started writing prose more in the last, I don't know, 10 years, and just reading a lot of novels, which I do more than I watch movies or TV. It's one of my big loves, fiction. And so my middle kid was 16 at the time, 2013, and I started writing coming of age story really as a way to relate to him. Coming of age kind of influenced by Catcher in the Rye and Candide, two of my favorite books when I was a teenager. A couple of months into writing it, Lou died in 2013. He died in October 2013. And in the last 12 years of his life, we had become friends. And Lou was a big hero of mine in my 20s and 30s, and on a lot of levels, as an artist, and as who he was. And I met him I was at the Garden, right, around 1990, I don't know, 5 or something. And I was doing a movie called I Shot Andy Warhol at the time. I was playing a friend of Lou's called Undine, who was in Chelsea Girls. So I was like, oh, this is and I used to see Lou walking around the village because I lived in the village, and I never had met him. And I'm like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to approach him. It was
Right.
at a Knicks game at the Garden. So it was on the escalator, and I made my way, and I think I tapped him on the shoulder, and I said, I'm an actor. And I said, I know you're not into this movie, because he was really against the fact they're making a movie about Valerie Solanas, who shot Andy and almost killed him, and probably did have a hand in him dying young anyway. And he went, I said, I know, you're not really into this movie. He goes, I think it's despicable that they're making a movie about that psycho. It's fucking disgusting. I'm like, I know. I'm an actor, and I got this part I'm playing on Dean. And he went, good luck. And he turned away, and I was like, I just made a fucking idiot of myself. And then he he's going up the escalator, and he kind of looked back over his shoulder a couple of times. Then he went, and I went back up. He goes, do your work, do a good job. And just remember, Undine was very funny. And then he turned away. And that exchange is in some ways became the seed of the story that the book became. And then after the Sopranos hit, I went to his concert at the Knitting Factory, and I was invited. His publicist, I got tickets through his publicist, from my manager, got me tickets. And then the publicist said, Lou wants to meet you. I didn't know Lou knew I was there or knew who I was or anything. I went backstage, and he gave me a hug, and we were talking for a long time. And then we stayed friends after that. So when he died, it really hit me on a lot of levels, as a fan, as a New Yorker, as an artist, and as a friend. And that's how the story was born, And I've been working this last couple of months with a writer, Francine Volpe, who you might have saw one of her plays at my theater, but we're working on adapting it for a movie.
Oh wow, that's great.
Yeah.
And Laurie read the book. His wife, Laurie Anderson.
She did. I got in touch with her and said, and I didn't know her very well. I knew Lou, much better. But I said, I wrote this book. It's coming out. I wanted you to hear from me. I said, I said, just know it comes from a place of respect and love. And, she read it and she said she liked it all. She goes, I didn't know that, Lou, because she met him, I guess, in the late 80s, maybe. And the book takes place in the 77, 78.
Yeah.
And she said, she goes, she liked it more just as a story on its own. She goes, I really didn't know that, Lou, at all, because Lou went through a lot of very different
Periods and personalities.
periods of his life. Yeah.
Is there anything you're working on now that you want to talk about, or anything that you're excited about that's like right in front of
Yeah,
you?
that adapting that into
Right.
a movie, which when I wrote the book, I was not thinking of it in terms of a movie, but after, I mean, you came to some of the to one of the events or two of them where I started reading from the book
Yeah.
and acting out scenes, and I started doing it with some other actors, and that kind of started to really make me think, oh, this can work, to bring this to life. But I'm really excited about that. There's a movie that I produced and starred in that premiered at the Metrograph. It had just had a theatrical run in New York in February. But it's available now on demand cable and iTunes and Amazon Prime, called Cabaret Maxime.
Okay.
A bunch of the actors who were in Hungry Ghost, some who were in The Sopranos. Some of these actors I've worked with for years before The Sopranos, like Ventimiglia and Sharon Angela. We were in acting school together, and we've done a lot of stuff. And the Cabaret Maxime is directed by a Portuguese filmmaker named Bruno Dalmeida. And it's the third movie we've done with him. But I love that movie, and I really, really happy with it. Yeah, and that's out. That's out now. Yeah, that's that's what's happening now, really.
Well, I got one last thing, and I think we went over time, which is all right. Sometimes these shows go over. I'm sorry, Matt Pitfield. Just, I guess, I've been out with you. We've gone to places. Place that was called Bell Rev. We were there one night, and you were like, I used to work here. This was Exterminator Chili when I was coming up, and and the whole kitchen staff came out. All these guys that were washing dishes and cooking and barbacks, the Mexican guys and they were just like so happy to see you. And few nights I've been out, like I got to know you as just as my friend, as a person, but then sometimes I step away, and it'll probably happen when I'm watching Sopranos back home here. But are you able to sit back and smile or feel the love that people have for your character and for that show, and be able to take it in a way that this was such a historic and amazing thing as a creation that you guys did? Are you able to get off on that in some way, or is it something?
Well, it's really happened like the last year and a half. A whole other generation has discovered the show, because we always had our audience that watched it when it was first on. They used to get together, like you said, on Sundays. People would have parties, make pasta, and families together and stuff. And that kind of our age group, they grew older with us and stuff. But the last year and a half, I've been from social media and meeting young people, like late teens, 20s, and 30s, who are obsessed with the show. And that I never expected to happen, and is very surprising, because that generation's pretty specific about what they like and what they don't like. And it's there's like, my kids don't really, they like the Honeymooners because I've turned them on to that, but they're not watching many TV shows from the 90s and the early 2000s. So that, I feel, is really cool. I mean, that the fact that generation has really embraced it, that's really special.
That's great. Yeah. Onward and upward. Stay healthy, and I'll see you soon outside the house.
I will see you soon. Definitely.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Michael. Great to talk
All right.
to you. All right.
Good to see you, brother. Stay safe.
Yes.